Hey guys, welcome back to Falcon Central Radio, part of the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I am your host, Aaron Freeman, and today we're going to be talking about the Atlanta Falcons, talking about free agency, talking about the upcoming 2020 NFL Draft. And tonight's episode features a couple of guests. Later on in the episode, I'll be having Dave Choate, the head honcho over at the Falcoholic. We'll dive deeper into the Falcons and their draft plans. But first, I have with me Frank Schwab, one of the Yahoo NFL experts. Welcome to the show, Frank.
What's going on, Aaron? How you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm good. I'm glad that we can talk some football, distract us from some other heavier issues going on in the world. I want to sort of jump right in, and since this is a Falcon show, get your thoughts on the Falcons' offseason moves. You know, they picked up Dante Fowler, they picked up Todd Gurley, they picked up Hayden Hurst, those big splashes. Any of those moves really stand out in your eyes as something that really helped the Falcons out this offseason?
You know, I think you got to take it as the whole, and it's, you know, for every guy they gained, they lost. You know, it's, yeah, you got Todd Gurley, you lost Devontae Freeman. Yeah, you got Hayden Hurst, you lost Austin Hooper. Devondre Campbell's gone. And, you know, I mean, it just, I don't know what to make of the Falcons moves as a whole because, yeah, they brought in, you know, good players. I like the Gurley signing. Why not? 1 year, $5 million? Sure. Why not? I thought Todd looked really good at the end of last year. Hayden Hurst, I thought they overpaid, but it's fine. But you lose Austin Hooper. You know, I mean, so I think for every guy they gained, they also lost a little bit. Like even, you know, I think Dante Fowler is better than Vic Beasley, but still Vic is gone. So it's hard to really, almost like the Falcons have been the past couple of years, it's hard to really get a finger on how good they are. I mean, you can tell yourself a very positive story. You can tell yourself a very negative story. I don't know what to make of their offseason. I think that, like I said, some of the moves they made I really did like, but some it's just like, well, okay, you replace an Austin Hooper with a Hayden Hurst. Have you really gained anything there? I don't think so. So I think overall they probably took a little bit of a step back, but you know, I mean, at least they did fill the holes that they created kind of with the guys leaving this offseason.
So would you think it's fair to say, with that being said, that a lot of their success this upcoming season, if they wind up achieving that, will depend on them getting more out of the guys that they currently have in the roster that they just haven't, for various reasons, been able to get back into the playoffs the last two seasons?
Yeah, and it's consistency too. We've seen this team play well. It's so weird, their pattern the last few years, where it's you put yourself in this huge hole. Looks like Quinn's going to get fired, and then by the end of the year, you rally and play really well, and it doesn't matter. And you say, part of you says, well, was it just meaningless at the end of the year? Or if not, why couldn't they play this way early in the season? I mean, last year mid-season they were horrible. They were one of the worst teams in football. And they played really well in the second half. I don't think most people noticed that. I think that by the time the Falcons started playing well, everybody had given up on them, moved on to other teams. They're talking about whoever, and they played well enough to save Dan Quinn's job, which I didn't think was possible. So I think some of it is just consistency, starting better. I think our offense is going to be just fine. I really do. I think Gurley's going to be just fine, especially behind an offensive line that should be better, getting another year older. Julio's great. Ridley's going to have a fine season. I think that he'll fill in whatever gap whatever loss you take from Hooper to Hurst. I think Ridley has a bigger year to make up for that. I think the defense does need to get better, but there's talent there. The Falcons, I remember doing last year's season previews, and I just remember getting to the Falcons and being like, I have no idea what to do with this team. I don't know if they're good. I don't know if they're bad. They could go 4-12. They could go 12-4. I have no idea. And it kind of the season played out that way where they were a terrible, just horrible team in the first half, great in the second half. And now you come into another offseason, you got to throw your hands up again and say, I could tell myself a story where they're a wild card team. They're even in contention in the NFC South. I can tell myself a story where Dan Quinn's getting fired by Halloween. It's perplexing, this whole football team.
Well, you talked about them being in contention in the NFC South. Obviously, there was a big move in the NFC South with the quarterback change down in Tampa. I'm curious, where would you put the Buccaneers now with Tom Brady and compare them maybe to the Falcons if you were sort of power ranking the NFC South teams right now?
Right, and I think that there's you could talk yourself into the Buccaneers. I'm not as high on this move as everybody else. I think the same people who were talking for months last year about how Tom Brady was washed up have just forgotten that. Like he's going to bounce back at age 43. If you look at the history of 43-year-old quarterbacks in the NFL, it's nothing. It's literally no history of success for any quarterback 43 or older. The only guy who's even started games at 43 or older is Vinny Testaverde. His last year with the Panthers, he started 6 games and he was terrible. Now, Tom Brady's an outlier. He's maybe the greatest player of all time. I get it. He wasn't terrible last year. He wasn't bad. He's gonna be thrown to Evans. He's gonna be thrown to Godwin. But I just don't know. I think the Buccaneers are telling themselves a story that I just can't buy. You hear Jason Licht, their GM, he was on ESPN a couple days ago saying, Brady has the ideal arm for this offense. And I'm looking at it like that. None of the numbers, eye test, nothing backs that up. I think if they're going into this thing thinking Brady can run the offense and he's 2007 Tom Brady and hasn't lost anything, I think they're in for a surprise. I worry, especially with no offseason. We're not. Who knows? We'll even see training camp. I think it's a big time transition for Tom Brady, and I wonder if we're just watching 2015 Peyton Manning here. And I'm not trying to be the guy who just predicts every year that Tom Brady's going to fall off and once one of these years I'll be right. But I just think there's a lot of warning signs here, and everybody's kind of saying, oh, now the Buccaneers can win the NFC South. I don't know. I just think that there's a lot of ways this could go really, really wrong. I still think the Saints are easily the class of the division. I think the Falcons are just the absolute wild card. The Panthers are going to stink, I think. So it's one of those where I have no idea what to expect out of the Falcons, and honestly don't really know what to expect out of the Buccaneers either, because this Brady thing could go really bad. It could go good. I mean, he is Tom Brady, but I see a lot of paths for this really being something where the Buccaneers wake up in the middle of October and say, wow, we have a 43-year-old quarterback for the next 2 years. What are we going to do?
Yeah, and how much credence do you put to the narrative that, just simply Tom Brady's inability to, turn the ball over, that he's very good with protecting the football in comparison to Jameis Winston is going to add a whole lot to that offense?
Yeah, I mean, even if Tom Brady's a game manager at this point, he probably is. It's better than a guy throwing 30 interceptions. You go 7-9 with a guy throwing 30 picks. I think 7 of those were pick sixes. He was absolutely miserable in some games. And I think if you want to tell me, look, Tom Brady's not the same guy. He's going to be a 18 touchdown, 6 interception guy. Well, that might be a real big upgrade for them because you're throwing 20 some less picks. So they went 7-9 last year with a guy who's literally giving games away. They probably would have won, 10, 11 games with that defense playing as well as it did. It was really a surprise. Their skill position guys, especially, Godwin and Evans, obviously, if they just had a reasonable quarterback not throwing the ball all over the place, maybe you do win 10, 11 games. And if you're going to tell me, hey, Tom Brady, even as a really expensive game manager, is going to do that, and he's going to bring leadership, and he's going to bring a lot of intangibles to the table. Okay, I can't argue that much against it. I just wonder if Tom Brady, if they're expecting a little too much out of him, and it's more, hey, this can be a guy who is carrying our offense, could be an MVP candidate. Just their comments are so optimistic, and I wonder what they're really thinking. If they think, I just can't imagine that they signed Tom Brady for him to be a game manager when that's probably what he should be at this point in his career.
Now, on the note of free agency, things are starting to slow down, wind down a little bit in free agency. I'm curious if there's some notable names, whether that's like a Jadeveon Clowney or Everson Griffin, some of these guys that are still out there in free agency that you're surprised haven't been scooped up yet.
Clowney's number one. I mean, he's kind of going with the Ndamukong Suh plan of I'm just going to wait it out and somebody's going to pay me. I wonder if Clowney at this point, I know his asking price has gone down. I think I saw that he's in the 17 to 18 million range, which is probably fair for a guy who's, I don't want to say a limited player, but he's not the 20 sack guy. He's not a Khalil Mack where you pay him and figure, okay, one of these years he could have 18, 19 sacks. He's a great run defender. He can rush a quarterback. He can do a little bit of everything, but I don't know if he's a $20 million guy. So I think he's realizing that maybe he takes a shorter term deal, couple of years, go back to Seattle, maybe go to the Titans have been interested, maybe another team off the board that's just saying, what are we going to spend this cap room on? Let's just go get Clowney. I think that those options are in play for him. And whoever he goes to, instant upgrade on the defense. I don't know if he's going to get, those 5 years he wants, but a couple of years, yeah, I would sign up for that. And then Clowney can hit free agency again if he signs a 1 or 2 year deal, kind of like Ndamukong was doing there. And then, the other guys, the two guys that stand out are two NFC South quarterbacks. I mean, it's amazing to me that we're looking at a season where Cam Newton could be a backup and Jameis Winston could be a backup or unsigned. I don't think that's going to happen, but tell me which team he goes to. You could kind of see this coming a couple weeks ago where he said, unless the Chargers are not serious about they're just leaking out, hey, Tyrod's our guy, and they're really waiting for another move, but nothing's happened with Cam. Nothing's happened with Jameis. So I kind of get the sense that the Chargers are going with Tyrod and probably a rookie they're going to draft. The Bears have made their move. The Patriots don't seem interested or something would happen there. What team can Cam Newton, a former MVP, a guy who I love his game, where's he going to go to? Where's Jameis, who led the NFL in passing yards last year? Where's he going to go? I have no idea. I think both of these guys are going to have to settle for weird short-term contracts backing up a shaky starter somewhere, hope to get their shot, almost like Tannehill. It's just a weird market where neither of these guys is going to get a starting job unless it's Chargers, Patriots, or some mystery team that's just going to blow everything up.
Yeah, I want to dive deeper on the whole Patriots thing. Are you one of the people that prescribe to the idea that, Belichick could take one of these quarterbacks and still be able to maintain a playoff caliber team with one of these quarterbacks versus Jared Stidham or Brian Hoyer or, drafting somebody?
Right. And let's say it's Andy Dalton, because I think that all the dots are connecting there, and Andy's going to get cut at some point. I don't think the cheap Bengals are going to keep him around as that expensive of a backup. So I think the Patriots are kind of just waiting it out, going to grab Andy Dalton when he comes available. Let's say that happens. I think they could be a 10-win team. Why not? This team really didn't have any faults. I mean, they weren't carried by Brady by any means. They were a really, really good defensive team. They have an offense that wasn't great at the end of the year, but could run the ball. And they had practically a game manager, a quarterback at the end of Brady's season. What's the difference with Andy Dalton? Do I think they're going to just fall off the planet because they have Andy Dalton instead of Tom Brady? No, the name brand isn't the same, but I can see Dalton playing well enough that they stay in contention. This was still a 12-win team last year. People say, I've seen maybe the Patriots are going to tank for Trevor Lawrence. Well, you really think the Patriots are going 1-15 with Bill Belichick as their coach? It ain't happening. So I think that as long as the Patriots get average level quarterback play, whether that's Stidham, whether that's Dalton, whether that's Cam, I don't know who it's going to be. I think that if they do land one of those veterans, I feel better about it because I know nothing about Jared Stidham. I know that he was highly thought of his second to last college year. His last college year didn't go well. Looked good in the preseason at times, didn't do really anything in the regular season, threw one pick and got benched right away. So Stidham is just who knows what you're going to get out of him. But if it's an Andy Dalton, if it's a Cam Newton, all right, I can at least envision what those guys are going to be like in that offense. I think the Patriots will be just fine, and it wouldn't even surprise me if they won another division title.
Moving ahead towards the NFL draft, I'm curious sort of what are your thoughts on the whole idea, because I've seen other people be critical of this, that the NFL is, pushing forward with the draft despite all the things going on in the world. Do you think that's a fair criticism, or are you happy that the draft is the one sports event right now that is actually going according to plan?
Right. And you know what, maybe this is just naive on my part. Maybe it's just be way too pie in the sky optimism, but I kind of think that the NFL is doing the right thing here because, or what's the real criticism of the NFL? If it's not a public health thing, they're going through all the different steps. They told teams today, hey, if the team facilities aren't going to be ready, if we can't have the draft there, it's going to be in total isolation. We're not having this thing where a bunch of people are in a draft room when it's not safe. So they're planning on doing this totally remotely. So it's not a public health issue. It's not something where there's a crowd. It's not like March Madness where you had a bunch of people that needed to be there just for operations, even if there wasn't fans in the stands. So from that aspect, there's no problem there. And so why would the NFL push it back? These GMs who are complaining are just no, just figure it out. What, you're not going to draft Mitch Trubisky ahead of Patrick Mahomes if you have more time? Because we've seen teams screw this up with an absolutely normal offseason. Every team is in the same boat. And I've been very critical of Roger Goodell in the past, but I think over the past few weeks, Roger Goodell's done as well as he can do with this pandemic. I think keeping free agency on time, keeping the draft on time, I think that it's a good thing. I think it's smart because we don't know if everything's okay by mid-June. The NFL's ready to roll. They can get right into OTAs, right into camp. They're not going to have a draft in the middle of July. So I think that from that aspect, it's the right thing. And the only people who are against this, I think anyway, are a lot of the people who are professional Twitter critics. It's when I talk to people who aren't in the business, friends, whatever, guys I'm in with fantasy leagues and stuff, they want the draft. They're excited for the draft. Bring it on. They need something other than just this doom and gloom in their lives. And I'm with that. I think that for everybody who's saying, "Oh, this is a bad look for the NFL," that's not reality. I don't think that a lot of people, normal, everyday fans, are feeling that way. Maybe I'm totally off base. Maybe it's a small sample size of friends I know are just football geeks. But I think that people want this. They need this. There's no real reason other than, hey, the NFL should do like everybody else. So I'm totally with Goodell here. I think he's actually, for as much as he's gotten wrong over the past years, I think Roger Goodell's handled this really, really well. And I'm fully in agreement that the NFL should keep on with the draft schedule.
Yeah, I'm with you. And again, maybe I'm in a bubble because most of the people I interact with online are football fans. And it seems like everybody is, gung-ho on the draft, continue as scheduled. And, it's just kind of funny that leave it to a global pandemic for people to finally stop criticizing Roger Goodell for the many mistakes that he has made. So we just need, some type of world-shattering event for Roger Goodell to come out looking good in some of these things. But talking about the draft, I'm curious sort of what is it, the main storyline that maybe you're looking at that you're eager to see, when we get to Thursday night in prime time, or, I don't even know how that's going to work now, given how things are, but sort of what is the storyline that you're sort of looking at that you're eager to see how it plays out?
And I'm not going on a limb here, but it's Tua. I mean, who gets him? Where does he go? This is a guy we need to remember. This was a guy who, before last season started, was almost a lock for the number one pick. And nobody argued with that. And then, Burrow had his breakout and Tua hurt his hip, and that changed everything. But every single thing that we've seen, that's been reported, that I've heard, that anybody else has heard, is that Tua's doing just fine. Like, all the signs are good. Yes, there's an injury history now, and he's gotten hurt a lot. But as far as the hip goes, it seems like he's going to be healed. It seems like he's going to be ready to go. So, I've seen, Gil Brandt, especially this week, has been saying anybody who thinks, Chase Young's not going number 2 is crazy. And he might be right, and he knows people there, obviously. But why wouldn't the Redskins consider Tua number 2? If Ron Rivera didn't draft Dwayne Haskins, Ron Rivera's starting all over. And if he doesn't think Dwayne Haskins is a good quarterback, and he thinks Tua is that guy we thought of, 6-7 months ago, who was going to be the number 1 pick of the draft, why wouldn't Ron Rivera want to start his program with a guy like that? Why wouldn't he take him second and say, I think this guy's a special quarterback. I don't care if we drafted Dwayne last year. He wasn't my guy, almost like the Rosen, Kyler Murray situation. So I'm fascinated by Tua. I do think Chase Young goes number 2. And then who trades up to number 3? I don't think there's any doubt the Lions are trading back, unless they've lost their minds. Somebody's going to give up a lot for Tua, probably the Dolphins, maybe the Chargers. I think that we're going to see a big move there. It's interesting to see which team takes him and what kind of player Tua is. And after that, I think there's so many of these receivers are so interesting. This is one of the deeper receiver drafts I can remember. I know I think it was 2014 with Odell Beckham's class. That was a real deep one, but this one has a lot to like. I mean, a lot of running backs, a lot of good offensive linemen. There's players in this draft who, if you need to fill, there's still a need to fill after free agency. There's a lot of top end guys. I think this is a really, really good draft. And I think it's going to draw record TV ratings. I think it's going to be like, NFC Championship type of ratings for TV. So I'm interested in this draft. I think it's going to be a really good one. And again, I think the number 1 story is, where does Tua go? Because he could be a real difference maker for somebody.
Yeah, I'm very curious how that plays out. And just to throw a wrinkle into the draft, because we've been assuming for a year that Tua is going to wind up in Miami, I feel like the Chargers are going to find a way to sort of snatch him. So
yeah, there's no way that Tyrod is their answer. There's right. Like, I just keep thinking like the Chargers have come out and said Tyrod Taylor's our guy. We're not going to make any moves. No, I like Tyrod well enough, but when you've built a team, if you look at all the rest of their offseason moves, everything else is pointed to we're loading up for a run this year. I mean, you get Linville Joseph and guys like that. You're just going to ride with Tyrod Taylor after that? No, that doesn't make any sense to me.
All right. Frank, I appreciate you joining us and sharing your thoughts on the Falcons, the NFC South, free agency, the draft. I hope we get an opportunity to do this again. Go ahead and let people know where they can find you on Twitter, what you got coming up for the people at Yahoo, or anything else you want to plug.
Yeah, at Yahoo Schwab on Twitter. That's the main place. Yahoo.com/NFL. We're cranking out stuff. I mean, I know we don't have any live sports, but the NFL is full swing. Hot Stove is going crazy. And then we've had a project I've been involved. All of us are involved in. Every sport is doing best ever brackets. We're down to the final four in the NFL. It's like 72 Dolphins against 75 Steelers, 84 49ers against 85 Bears. It's fan vote. It's fun. I nerded out on this just putting together the brackets. So go, and it goes up tomorrow morning. Go vote. Have fun with the bracket. We'll figure out who the best NFL team of all time is.
Absolutely. Frank, really appreciate you joining us tonight, and have a good night and stay safe out there, man.
Absolutely. I appreciate it.
So, guys, we have Dave Choate of the Falcoholic who's going to join us and take us deeper into his thoughts on the Falcons coming up right now on the podcast. Dave, how are things?
Good. How's it going?
It's going pretty good, man. Yeah, we get to talk a little bit more Falcons on tonight's episode, where last couple of weeks we've had some guests talking a lot more NFL, and we've spent probably more time talking Tom Brady on this podcast than the Falcons. And on that note, I do want to get your thoughts on Tom Brady and Teddy Bridgewater joining the division.
It's kind of a shame that Teddy Bridgewater keeps having to play for teams that I'm required to dislike, because I really like Teddy Bridgewater. I think this is a nice landing spot for him. So certainly happy that he's got his starting gig again. I don't really expect the Panthers to be a great team, but I think it's an opportunity for him to play well with a pretty good supporting cast, and hopefully make himself some more money somewhere else in a year or two when the Panthers inevitably move on, add somebody else. Brady to the Buccaneers is, I'm hoping 43-year-old Brady is no good anymore. I'm hoping without Bill Belichick, he's just no good. I've obviously been watching him from close up all these years up here in New England, and I've had enough Tom Brady. So of course, inevitably, he was going to join a team that gets overhyped every year, anyways, right? So I mean, the Bucs are clearly talented enough to make some noise, but I just don't know if Brady's the guy that's going to push him over the hump this year. He didn't look that great last year, and I know the supporting cast wasn't there, but 43 is 43. I'm not even that old anymore, so
Me neither. We've been around for a while, but not quite there yet.
Not quite.
Yeah. So let's talk Falcons, and let's talk about their offseason moves so far. They picked up Dante Fowler, Todd Gurley, Hayden Hurst, maybe another move. Maybe you're a big fan of Leroy Reynolds signing. But sort of which move do you like the most out of the moves that they've made so far this offseason?
I think it is Fowler because, I think every single year since 2008 and probably before that, I've been hopefully mocking a pass rusher to the Falcons that I like a lot, and it rarely works out, if ever. So getting somebody like Fowler, who is coming off a very successful year, is still pretty young, seems amped to be here, is going to, eat fast and physical O's at the kitchen table at Dan Quinn's house. It seems like a great fit. So I don't know if I love the money at first. I don't know if I love the fact that it's really been the one breakout year, but he's the guy that I think I have the highest hopes for. Probably followed by Hayden Hurst. I think that's, even though they had to give up the draft capital to make that happen, he's a guy I do like. I think he'll step in and, be 75% and hopefully it's Austin Hooper, which is, I think, all they'll need if Calvin Ridley takes a step forward.
Okay. So it sounds like you're not as you have a few more questions about the Todd Gurley and his impact this year?
I do. I think my thing with Todd Gurley is, how healthy is he? I mean, how effective is he going to be on a week to week basis? Do we know that? Do we know how much of it last year was just the Rams being weird and stubborn versus recognizing that he maybe couldn't hold up to that early season workload and isn't quite the player he was a couple of years ago, and so pair that with Dirk Cutter and the Falcons' run offense, which is unimaginative, we'll say. Maybe it doesn't feel like maybe the ideal landing spot for him to recoup all his value. So it is a 1 year deal. It's not hugely expensive. I get why the Falcons did it for a number of reasons, including making UGA fans happy for the first time in many, many years. But I'm not sure it's going to be, the huge impact signing that everyone thinks it will be. And I still wouldn't be surprised if they add another back between now and June.
So, do you think the team is done in free agency at this point, or do you feel like there's still more moves to be made?
I think there'll be a couple of smaller moves. An interesting thing that I'm just going to say out loud that I noticed a couple weeks back now was that Isaiah Crowell, of all people, suddenly followed a ton of Atlanta area accounts out of nowhere, a couple hundred of them, it seemed like. And I thought that was, probably random and unusual. But again, if you're looking for a Gurley insurance policy, maybe he's an interesting guy to pick up if he's healthy. I think this team still has needs at all three levels of the defense. I don't think they can seriously go into the draft expecting to fill all those with quality players, just given their track record. So I don't think they're quite done. I think they're definitely done signing guys that you're like, oh, that's a fairly big name. I don't think they're going to go out there and I'm sorry to say this, but get Michael Bennett or anybody like that. I know that hurts, but I think they're not quite at the point yet where it's just veteran minimum guys. In mid-May, I think there's a couple more signings left.
Now, I know this is going to be personally painful to you, but a guy like Jadeveon Clowney's out there, and how much would it hurt if because I was just talking about this with Frank Schwab from Yahoo, and the fact that Clowney's price tag is potentially going down because he was initially asking for $20 million a year. How for lack of a better term, butthurt would you feel if Jadeveon Clowney winds up signing like a 3-year deal for like $16-17 million, and the Falcons wound up paying a similar price for Dante Fowler? No offense to Dante Fowler, but I know you and Jadeveon Clowney go way back in the day.
Yeah, I mean, I never got my Glenn Dorsey signing. So at the end of the day, Clowney's my big hope here. So that would kind of hurt because I think that Clowney, for the lack of sacks that he had last year and the lack of the huge pass rushing numbers year after year is a great player, well-rounded player, and obviously a guy that I'm hoping winds up in Atlanta so that I can live down my past mistakes with him. So, it would hurt. I just keep hoping that if it's going to come to that, he doesn't end up with an NFC contender or in the NFC South, which would be the worst case scenario. But it's definitely going to be leaving me a little butthurt.
Okay. So I want to talk about the cornerback situation, and that'll sort of bridge us into the conversation about the draft, I guess, a little bit. Is it fair to freak out about the current state of the Falcons corner? Because I'm looking around the league and, I'm like, do the Falcons have the worst cornerback group in the entire NFL? They're probably in the bottom 5 at the very least, right? So, like, is this a huge problem, or is this something that we can breathe easy because they're going to, one of these low-key signings that you're talking about, get somebody to help out at corner in addition to Bleedy Ray Wilson, or is this a position that they can feel pretty confident in your eyes that they can address in the draft?
I think they feel they have to address it in the draft, and I think that this is a pretty good class to have to do it in. I definitely don't think we should be feeling comfortable. I love the nickname Young Blanket as much as anybody, but I don't think that means Isaiah Oliver is ready to be a shutdown cornerback. you're talking about two young, relatively unproven guys on top of the depth chart. Bleedy Ray Wilson, who's, done really well for the Falcons, but is probably better as a fill-in. And then Jordan Miller, who's suspended for a couple games anyways. And then I don't know if you're looking at Casey or Chris Cooper after that or both. But it's kind of a bleak situation. I don't think there's anybody there that you can say is definitely going to be a great player. I do think that a small ticket free agent signing is a possibility with Miller missing a couple of games at the beginning of the year, but I think this has to be a first or second day of the draft priority, and I think the Falcons know that. I just hope they don't get boxed into taking one at 16 if it's not the guy they want.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I remember 2 years ago we were looking at the D tackle position and being like, there's no way that they can go into the season, with Jack Crawford and Grady Jarrett as their D tackles. And everybody expected them to, take a D tackle in round one, and Taven Bryan was right there for the taking. You had the Dan Quinn Florida connections. It seemed like a no-brainer, and then they snatched up Calvin Ridley, and it just reaffirms the whole, notion that we always say is the Falcons are going to zig when you expect them to zag when it comes to the draft. I'm curious, do you think there's a chance that they do that at the cornerback position, whether, it's a CJ Henderson or Christian Fulton or somebody else there that, between now and, April, whenever, people are going to start saying, okay, this is going to be the Falcons pick if he's there. And then they wind up, going in another direction.
Yeah, I think it's really possible they'll do that. I think the thing that I keep looking at is, the last couple of years, and we can't prove that they were interested in these guys, but they certainly took a hard look from all accounts at linebacker a couple of years ago. They were looking at Ed Oliver a year ago, supposedly. So I think that there are, maybe unfulfilled desires for Dan Quinn, as awkward as that is to put it that way, at defensive tackle and linebacker. And I think that, if they don't feel like Henderson or Fulton or, whoever else you like at 16 at corner is, going to be a shutdown guy, and you've got somebody like Kinlaw available or Murray if they love him at linebacker, I think that that's a real possibility. I think we're going to get fixated on corner because it is such a huge need. But I think the Falcons have shown a lot of comfort in the past with going second, third round for cornerback to try to fill that need. And I think it's a strong possibility again.
So you mentioned some alternate options at D tackle and linebacker in addition to the corner. Is there another position that you could sit there and say, it wouldn't totally shock me if the Falcons went for a player at that spot at 16?
Safety comes to mind. I think in any other year, a year maybe where everyone wasn't supposedly in danger of losing their jobs if this team goes south again, I think they would take a hard look at safety. I still can't rule it out because it's the Falcons, right? That's going to be a potentially huge need a year from now because everybody's lining up for free agency. You don't know necessarily what you're going to get from Neal this year. Casey, maybe they want to get him back to cornerback. I don't really know their plans there, but it's a position that I think, back in February, I think we were all talking a little bit about Kyle Duggar potentially being, a pick in the second round for the Falcons. Well, so was Keanu Neal, and he went, was it 17, 18 when he went. So, I don't think we can really afford to rule out safety, even as a position of need for them. I think if I had to guess at the end of the day, I think, defensive tackle, safety is the surprise pick. I don't necessarily think it's going to be an edge rusher, even if maybe it should be.
Yeah, you talk about Neal and, that draft in 2016. I think a lot of us had him penciled in as like, the overwhelming favorite to be their second round pick. They took him in round one. You kind of talk a little bit about Chris Lindstrom last year, where I think a lot of people were projecting him to go in round two. They took him in round one. You can make the same case with Caleb McGarry a little bit later when they moved back and into the first round. So it's very clear that the Falcons don't necessarily value players the same way that, the consensus or the draft Twitter or whatever you want to call them, the media sort of values them. If you, in addition to some of the players that you've already talked about, is there somebody else out there that you sort of have your eye on that, oh, this guy is a great fit for the Falcons, but maybe in round 2, but then you're sort of sitting there thinking, well, if past precedent shows itself again, maybe that means that that player is actually a potential first round option.
It's so weird and random in so many ways, and that's a great way to preface this, right? Because it's hopefully no way this happens, but the more I read, in particular in February, and watched of Logan Wilson, he was a guy that I was like, this feels like it could be a surprise Falcons pick, right? Seems to fit the mold for them. He's from way out west in the middle of nowhere, which Dimitrov loves. We know that, he's a Roy Bierman type, maybe that way. So he's a player that, I think second, third round projections potentially, but maybe sneaks into the bottom half of the first round as somebody the Falcons could fall in love with. I think that linebacker is the one that comes to mind in a lot of ways because, I like Alua Khan. I think he can be a starter in this league, but I don't know if the Falcons are convinced, and I don't know that they've added anyone between Reynolds and Robinson that they're going to count on to start either. So that feels like a position where, since they love the athleticism so much at linebacker, maybe they take a swing for the fences at a guy that maybe we didn't expect in the first round. And so Wilson did come to mind, and still comes to mind, I guess.
Yeah. I haven't done as much homework on the linebackers yet, but Wilson is a name that keeps bubbling up to the surface. I'm like, okay, when I do sit down and really dig into this linebacker class, he's going to be near the top of the list. But, I'm still haven't, even though we're all on quarantine and have plenty of free time, I still haven't finished watching a whole bunch of these cornerback prospects that I put on my watch list like 3 weeks ago. But, I'll cram them all before, the week before the draft or whatever the case may be.
No sleep.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Talking about the draft, we talked a lot about sort of what their top priorities are. Whether it's a position, whether it's a player, we don't spend that much time talking about like the middle rounds and the later rounds, but what is a position out there or a player out there or whatever you want to, attack it at, but that you feel like, okay, this is an underrated need or this is an underrated position or this is an underrated player that I think really fits a need for the Falcons.
I think we can't underrate center as a need for this team. I don't necessarily think they're going to go early on this, but it is the final year of Alex Mack's contract. He is getting older. I know that Justin McCray came in and said, I can play center. And we all know that Sean Harlow thinks he can play center too. But I don't look at that group and the players that the Falcons have assembled and think that there's a logical candidate to, step up if Mack gets hurt this year, much less replace him a year from now. And I think you can just try to, hope for a great class a year from now and pick up your guy. But I think it's something that, third, fourth round, if there's a player they like there, they may as well try to fix that, one outstanding need on the offensive line. I know people will argue for left guard being an issue, but I think you can always get away with one, hopefully average guard position on the roster if you build everything else up. And I know we've talked about that before. So I do think center is a position that will get addressed at some point. If it's, day 3, maybe it's not somebody that they expect to be more than filler this year, but I do think they have to add somebody.
Yeah, I feel like of all the offensive needs, that's the one position that I could see them passing on a running back. I could see them passing on a receiver. I could see them passing on a tight end. But I would be shocked if they came out of this draft without a center of the future. And, on that note, we're talking a lot about how, they're on the hot seat, this regime, this coaching staff, and a lot of that seems to suggest that a lot of their moves are going to be geared towards what's going to help them out the most this year, which I think is a big reason why people think that they should prioritize the left guard position, because that's the obvious weakness on the starting five offensive line. But do you feel like center of all the positions, and whether that's a running back to sort of be the heir apparent to Gurley? You already mentioned safety, given questions about Keanu Neal's long-term availability and Ricardo Allen, getting up there in age. Do you feel like center is the one position that the Falcons, if any, are going to prioritize for 2021 and beyond, as opposed to some of these other positions where they really kind of have to focus in on this upcoming season?
I think so. And I think the reason for that is, left guard and safety. If there are injuries, if your starter falters, you've got some options there, right? If they start James Carpenter again this year, for some reason, you have Brown and Gono to potentially take over at that spot. You could kick Harlow over there if again you love him, or McCray. Like there will be options at guard. I think there will be options at safety. I think that Cooper's still hanging around. He's a player that they liked a year ago, and is somebody that I think could be quality depth. But again, in my eyes anyways, you don't have that depth at center at all. And so it's something that has to be addressed. And I think, with the short-term focus, you're not even thinking about 2021, even though, hopefully they are. But again, if injury strikes this year, you're in big trouble without Alex Mack if you don't have a contingency plan that's better than what you've got right now.
Yeah. We've talked about their need to upgrade the pass rush in free agency and maybe getting another guy there. And you've already sort of talked about, the possibility of getting a guy like Javon Kinlaw in round one. Is that sort of the guy that's like the dream pick? Is there one, last year it seemed like everybody was, going goo goo gaga for Ed Oliver. Is there one particular guy in this year's class? I've heard other people say Isaiah Simmons, but I don't think anybody really thinks has any chance of falling to 16. But is there one particular player at the top of this draft class that you're like, this is the cream of the crop? This is the new Jadeveon Clowney for this upcoming draft class?
Yeah, I think because Chase Young is such a pipe dream at this point, right? And I know had things gone a little bit differently, the Falcons are sitting in a top 10 pick, maybe top 5, we'd be talking seriously about what it would take to get him. And I think Dimitroff would be too. But with that out of question, I think we were talking about this on Falcoholic Live last night, and just that ideal pick at 16. And I think it is Kinlaw. To me, even as a short-term need, you look at the quarterbacks in the NFC South and you look at, how you would hope to attack them. None of these guys have cannons. None of them, are necessarily great at escaping. They like to step up in the pocket, and having Kinlaw and Grady Jarrett right next to each other would hopefully ensure that there is no pocket to step into. I've just been thinking about, for a couple of years now at least, what it would be like to pair Jarrett with a truly dominant partner, like Jonathan Babineau never got to have, really. And I think that, Kinlaw could be that guy. I think he's good enough to be that guy. And if he could somehow make it to 16 or even a couple picks ahead of that, I think the Falcons have to do what it takes to get him. I think he'd be far more transformative for them this year and into the future than, a Chasson or a Henderson or anybody like that.
Now, we talk about Kinlaw because, at various points, he hasn't necessarily been considered on the same level as a player like Derek Brown. But, Brown didn't necessarily test particularly well at the combine. There have been some talks that maybe some teams will rate Kinlaw over him, and there aren't that many teams picking at the top of the draft that are, really have a massive need at D-tackle. There certainly are enough where, either one of those players fall into 16. But is there, at some point, do we need to have the conversation about if Derek Brown is on the board? Is he even more coveted player, or are some of the concerns that he may not have the athletic upside of a Kinlaw to be sort of the dominant pass rusher that typically, when you look at teams that successfully draft D tackles in round one, and certainly when you factor in getting those guys to a second contract with the team that drafted them, it typically is the high level pass rushers, the Aaron Donalds, the Fletcher Coxes of the world, as opposed to the Danny Sheltons, and even our personal favorite 350-pound D tackle Dante Poe. So what are your thoughts on sort of the idea of maybe Derek Brown? Is he higher than Kinlaw? Is he the same as Kinlaw? Is he below Kinlaw in your eyes?
I guess in my eyes, and who knows with the Falcons, right? I certainly don't. But I would guess that Kinlaw would be, for their needs, more of a coveted player than Brown. I think that if Kinlaw's gone and Brown is there, I think he's still going to be one of the best players on the board. I think that, maybe some of the concerns about his athletic profile are a little bit overblown. I think he's a great player. I personally prefer Kinlaw because I think that if that pick hits and Kinlaw is as good as he's supposed to be, he could be a wrecking ball in the middle of that defensive line. And I think that after all these years, I still, the pass rush is the thing that I would love to see fixed more than anything else. And I think Kinlaw gives you a better chance of getting there than Brown. But I'm not convinced that, again, if Kinlaw's not there and Brown is there, that the Falcons can just look at their defensive tackle rotation that they've put together and say, well, John Kaminsky's going to be that guy instead. And then, you've got a couple of run stuffers and you're done. I don't know if that's a wise decision this year or into the future, and I think Brown would be a legitimate option.
Yeah, I mean, what do you say to the criticisms like people like myself have that, given the losses of Adrian Claiborne, you certainly, I don't think anybody's arguing that Fowler isn't an upgrade over someone like Vic Beasley, but losing Claiborne, losing Crawford, even, you can throw Devondre Campbell into the mix with some of his blitzing in the second half of the season being pretty effective, that even though the Falcons made this big splash with Dante Fowler, their pass rush is moving in the wrong direction. Would you agree with that criticism? Or do you feel like, it's stable, they just need maybe another piece like a Kinlaw or somebody else to sort of push it over the top?
I think they need another piece like a Kinlaw. That's full stop. They need another quality player there. I don't know how far off they are if a couple of things work out. I think if Kaminsky is the kind of player that they hope he will be, as soon as this year, that helps a great deal. That's something that's worth considering. And I also think that, we tend to forget about Tack, I think, because he's had a couple of so-so years in a row. Last year, on paper at least, I think was pretty underwhelming, but he's still a player that I believe in. And I think that, if you add another piece, if you have Fowler here, and you already have Jarrett, that hopefully a healthy Tack gets back on track and helps a lot. So I think right now, I think it's inarguable that they've taken a step back, even with the addition of Fowler. I just know with the way that they like to rotate players that they've lost guys who can rush the passer, have a proven history of it. But I don't think that they're, necessarily a bunch of players away. I think they're one or two quality options and a couple of good or lucky breaks away from being better off than they've been for the last couple of years.
And you talked about, we've talked a lot about Kinlaw and getting more help on the interior, but, looking at some of these edge guys that for most of the offseason until we signed Fowler, a lot of people seem to be, pegging to the Falcons in that first round. And whether that's LSU's K'Lavon Chaisson, Wisconsin's Zach Bond has gotten a lot of buzz because of the potential that he could play some linebacker for you as well and be more of that Campbell replacement. Or maybe some other guys, AJ Epinesa, whether you want to put him as a interior guy or an edge guy, I guess he has the ability to do both for you. So that does add some plus value there. Is there, some other, guy that can help out with this pass rush that you feel like, in addition to Kinlaw or even Brown, that can potentially be an option for the team at the top of the draft.
Yeah, I think Chason is somebody that I know our draft guys at the Falcoholic love that guy. And I think that certainly he's got a ton of upside. I think, it's weird for me to be in a position where, that edge rusher isn't my top priority, isn't maybe the guy that I'm in love with, because aside from Ed Oliver a year ago, that's kind of been my standard position for like a decade now. But I think, he would be the guy that I would be most comfortable taking at 16. I just, I think after the combine for Epinesa, it's not necessarily something that I can see the Falcons going for. Just maybe that if Derek Brown's athletic profile was maybe a little bit overblown, I think that maybe that was maybe not talked about enough, that he tested quite so poorly. So I just can't see him being an option at 16. But Chason would be my pick at 16. If it gets to that, I have to think, though, that it's not maybe their top priority, having signed Fowler.
Okay. Dave, it's, you talk about how long you've been waiting for the team to get a pass rusher. It's been since 2004 when, they were picking in the top 10, and I was hoping Will Smith, he was going to fall to them at, I think, 8 that year when they took D'Angelo Hall. And he went like 6 to the Saints or whatever, the late Will Smith, rest in peace. But that was like the first of probably, like, I would say, it's been 15, 16 drafts since then. I would say probably for at least 12 of them, I have wanted the Falcons to take a pass rusher in the first round. So hopefully, Ken Law is the guy. But, at this point in time, as I often say, beggars can't be choosers. So if they wind up taking any pass rusher in the first round, I'll be like, hey, man, at least it's something. This happens once a decade, seemingly, with this team. So I'll take it. If we kick off the 2020s with the pass rusher, I'll take it. But Dave, I really do appreciate you joining me on tonight's episode, and let the people know what sort of articles and content you guys got coming up over at the Falcoholic for the rest of this month leading up to the draft.
Yeah. So we'll have a ton of draft content. We're taking a closer look at a lot of the cornerbacks in this class. We're going to get to linebacker and defensive line, I think, in the near future. And we're also going to be taking a look at just, team fits for everyone tomorrow. We've got something coming up looking at, 2019 draft picks. How do they fit on this roster? And going forward, we just want to understand, if the Falcons don't get the guys we want at positions of need, what do they actually have, and how good will they be? And, we're going to try to stay away from the record predictions and all that for a little bit longer, for obvious reasons. But, just trying to figure out what's going to happen if we even have a season. So look for that.
Okay. Well, I look forward to reading that stuff and disagreeing with that stuff, because as I often do. But Dave, I definitely appreciate it, and we'll definitely try to get you back on the show, particularly after the draft, to get your thoughts, and we can sort of commiserate together about the crazy things that the Falcons did on draft weekend.
A tradition unlike any other. So
there's nothing better than those minutes leading up to the Thursday night pick and the Falcons go in a completely different direction, and just seeing the wind go out of everybody. And I love you guys at the Falcoholic for doing the live show. And every time for like 3 or 4 years straight, just looking at the reaction on Kevin and Eric's faces as the Falcons make their pick. And they're just like, really? Okay. That's a tradition like any other. So I look forward to that.
I do too, really. Lindstrom last year was going to be hard to top, but we'll see.
Absolutely. Tack was another great one, but then Tack went on a rampage on live television and, restored my faith in the Falcons for taking a player that I was a little underwhelmed by, at least my initial reaction to it. But I believe I'm prepared for it, but I always say that, and then they do something weird, and I'm like, okay, this is not what I expected, but we'll see what happens, man.
We'll see what happens.
All right, Dave, I really appreciate you. Have a good night, my friend.
Take it easy. Thanks.
So, guys, there you have it. Falcon Central Radio in the books. I know, as promised, we got some Falcons talk in tonight. I know we've spent a lot of time the last couple of weeks with some great guests. No complaints here from me, but I know you guys are Falcons fans, and you want to get some more Falcons content. So we got a solid 35 minutes of deep dive on Falcon stuff, and we'll continue to get great Falcons discussions on the show in the coming weeks. So we'll probably be back again at 9:00 on Thursday. But you guys can get your Falcon Central Radio fix between now and then, because on Saturday, the plan is for me to do another all 22 review of a Falcons player, and the people watching it live last week voted on Hayden Hurst. And last week we did Todd Gurley, and check out, there's an hour-long episode on this channel of me breaking down basically 20 plays of Todd Gurley as a runner dating back to 2018, as well as 2019, as a pass catcher, as a pass protector. So we went through the ins and out of Todd Gurley's and what ability he has at this point in time. And, if you don't want to watch the full hour-long episode, the too long didn't watch version of that is Todd Gurley's still a good player, just probably not as good a player as he was at his peak in 2017 and 2018. And so we will, I don't have particularly an angle on how I want to approach the Hayden Hurst one, because I need to go back and watch more film. And so, stay tuned to sort of what angle I come at with Hayden Hurst and what he can do. But based off of my previous comments, he's very similar to Austin Hooper. So there's a good chance that a lot of that film breakdown will be showing you the ways that he's very similar to Austin Hooper, and perhaps some of the ways that he's different. So you definitely want to subscribe to this channel, Pro Football Central, so that you guys can watch that live. Of course, you want to like this video, share it with people. If you want to throw it up on Twitter or Facebook or wherever you guys want to plug the show. Of course, the more views we get, the better. And you can share this great Falcons content. Of course, if you want to get the audio version of this show, you can find it on a variety of podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher. You can get all the links to that at profootballcentral.com. You can get the links to that at the Falcons PFC Twitter account. I'm on Twitter at FalcFans. Make sure that you're following PF Central, Pro Football Central, on Twitter, because my boss, my producer, Brian Harrington, the founder of Pro Football Central, is back doing a show. If you missed last week's episode that he did on Periscope at PF Central, he had Tampa Bay Buccaneer defensive back MJ Stewart and new Cleveland Browns D-tackle Andrew Billings on. Those two great interviews right before the show. And hopefully Brian, he's dealing with some personal issues this week, so he didn't get to do a show this week, but hopefully he'll be back next week with some great guests to lead you guys into next week's Falcon Central Radio. Check us out on Facebook, Falcon Central Radio there. And I feel like that's all the plugs I needed to get. Oh yeah, we're doing some great draft interviews as well. Hopefully we got a couple more on deck. But if you missed the one where Charlotte pass rusher Alex Highsmith, Cincinnati tight end Josiah DeGuara, those were last week right here on YouTube. So you can check those out again. Subscribe to the show so that you can get updates on those interviews. We got another one, haven't quite scheduled it yet, but there is a prominent player that a lot of people think could be the Falcons' early round pick as a tease that we're hoping to get as an interview leading up to the draft. So look forward to that. So definitely want to subscribe to the channel so you guys can get updates to that. And of course, follow me on Twitter at FalcFans to get further updates. Guys, really appreciate you tuning in tonight. And we'll be back this weekend with a Hayden Hurst film breakdown.